the people amongst who are writing on, there have been a lot of fine writers. I think the first distinction I want to make, Gideon and Sharda, is that sometimes there's a confusion between reporting and writing, or basic communicating with your reader, or communicating the, you know, the action that may have happened, or whatever the person you may have met, or writing about the person or a match or whatever else it might be with a certain hatke, some kind of a flourish, which makes it even better to read. And as I think Prem was telling us in the earlier session, that it stays with you for a far longer time. Now, is that a distinction that comes easily or doesn't come easily? I mean, it's not about just the writers, it's also about the people receiving the communication. A lot of them are happy with just what they've got. You have to have a palate for good writing, maybe an understanding, and therefore, you know, it works both ways. It helps the writer, it also helps the reader. Where do you see in this matrix yourself fitting in, how you worked your way through?
I appreciate the distinction, but... oh, can we be heard? I appreciate the distinction, but I only know one way to write, and that's the way I like it, the way I'd like to read it. So, so it's not like when I'm reporting, I sort of take away 50 IQ points and try to write down to my audience. There is a distinction sometimes drawn between being a journalist and being a writer, and I see it as a kind of a false distinction. It pretends that journalists can't aspire to write well, and it pretends that writers shouldn't do the basics of reporting, which I think should be fundamental. That the act of observation should be a skill that you cultivate endlessly and go on perfecting. So it's not like if I'm in the position where I have to write a match report, I necessarily assume that I have to write in a different way to that. The tone in which I might strike in an essay or in a book. I'm just not that versatile. I'm just I call it as I see it, and maybe I'll learn a few new tricks for the digital age, but they're not coming naturally.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting what Gideon is saying about, you know, the distinction between writing and between journalism and writing. And when we were growing up as journalists, we were always told, so-and-so is a great sports writer, so-and-so is a great sports writer. And my immediate reflex was to say, no, I'm a journalist. If someone asks me, what do you do for a living? I'll say, I'm a journalist. They said, oh, you're a sports writer. I said, yeah, you know, I write in English, and I write, but I'm a sports journalist. And do you sort of make a switch? I think what happens with age is that it comes naturally, the way, whatever you're doing, whatever you're writing about. And you always find that there are things, your basic function of why you are writing or what you're writing is to share either what you have found out or what you have seen or what you have heard or what your understanding is of any particular event. So it's not that you write differently, but it's just that you are made to write in a different manner because of the topics that are before you. You know, and working for Cricinfo, as I have learned, as Sambit will say, is that you have to literally at some point detach yourself from your nationality and write. And that's a great liberating thing, and it opens your mind up as well, and you learn to write differently. Whereas with India Today, you are only writing about Indian cricket and the Indian team, and once in 10 years you wrote about Muralidharan, you know. So, that is, I think it comes out of a habit at some point that you have to have. Maybe it's like finding a voice, like it's having a voice that is your active voice or your passive voice. Or
yeah, and frankly, you know, I often write about the past, but just because I write about history doesn't make me a historian. I don't have any qualifications to be a historian. I just researching and talking to people and reading sources. They're things that should come naturally to journalists.
But that's what a historian is about. I mean, without the formal degrees. You know, so no, I think I think both you and Sharda gave a slightly different perspective, because I think from the Indian's point of view, standpoint, in newsrooms, you were,
Yeah, sure.
you know, kind of, it was told to you repeatedly
Yes.
that you're a journalist first.
Yes.
And then whatever else you might be.
Yeah.
You could be a feature writer, you
Yes.
could perhaps be a sports writer, but essentially you're a journalist.
Yeah.
Maybe the distinction didn't exist from where you are coming.
Yeah, well, I was first of all a business journalist. I started in newspapers when I left school in 1984. And for the first probably 5 or 6 years of my career as a journalist, I wrote nothing but business stories. I loved cricket, and I watched cricket, and I played cricket. I'd always had a thought that I might like to write about it occasionally, but it wasn't my consuming ambition. I just simply wanted to be a journalist and to have an interesting time indulging my curiosity and expressing my imagination. And then when I was living in England in 1989-90, working as a business journalist again, that's when I started writing about cricket, because I thought I might like to have a go. There weren't necessarily people around who were writing it the way I would like to read it. It's as simple as that.
So Sharda, interestingly, you chose to write a lot more on cricket subsequently. I mean, you've done all sports. And first things first, about getting into sports journalism, when there was a time when it was kind of unthought of for women to get into sports journalism, and then making a decisive shift towards cricket. What were the influences? What were the compulsions?
I must tell everyone that when I first joined Midday, Ayaz was my boss for some time, for a few months. But what I always remember is that there was a press conference. I was the only female journalist around on the scene. People were largely patient, tolerant. There were some people who were not so great, but there was a press conference where I was sitting. This is a sentimental aside, where there was a press conference at the CCI, and there was lunch, and of course, and I was sitting by myself. And Ayaz came up to me with his plate and said, "Why are you sitting alone?" And he didn't work for me at the time. And at that time, I was reading his copy and remembering his first lines of his reports and saying, "Wow, I wish I could write like that." The reason why I became a sports journalist is because I loved sports and I loved words. And I didn't think I was ever going to get a job in it. I wanted to be a journalist anyway. So if it would have been on the copy desk, I would have done it. If it would have been doing the beat of urban civic planning, whatever the beats were at that time that you had. Crime was a bit daunting, but the other beats, I wanted to be a journalist because you could either do journalism or you could do advertising. And Rizwan will excuse me, at that time it was, no, you're selling soaps and all. It's not a noble profession. Journalism is a noble profession. That's why I took it. I was lucky to get the midday job and so on. Making the switch only to cricket was just a function of what the job required. I needed a change of scene. I'd worked at India Today for 10 years, and I was writing. I was essentially doing feature writing after working at a newspaper. And cricket was the sport that even in India Today, if you're writing about other sports, the percentage was about 80-20. You wrote about cricket, and I wanted a change of scene, and I was offered the job, and I took it. I missed writing about other sports. I really enjoyed writing that. So I wrote a column for a newspaper, and now we've got a website, espn.in, that you can write about other sports as well. And as Sambit knows, to his great discomfiture, I can now write 2,000 words, 5,000 words, whatever I feel like. 12.
So, I mean, the premise of this discussion is that is there a dearth of literary quality in cricket writing now? Do you feel that? Do you feel that writing on cricket has slumped? Do you think it's improved?
Well, what it certainly hasn't slumped in is in volume. There's an enormous increase in volume. There is just so much more to read. It feels like it's almost impossible to keep up with the volume that come up. And perhaps as a proportion of the content, kind of journalism that has some sort of literary aspiration is smaller or under threat. But in a sense, the market itself has grown so much that I can't help feeling the possibilities are endless. I don't think there would have been a niche for me as a writer 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Probably wouldn't have been for Sharda. And the barriers to entry as far as writing are much lower. There used to be fewer outlets. Newspapers used to have a stranglehold on the dissemination of cricket journalism. Now there are just so many more different ways to do it. The fact is, I've only mastered a few of them, or I've only ever tried to do a few of them. Cricket books has become sort of my main field of endeavour, which actually is probably an ever-diminishing area of expression. But it actually seems a much more exciting period to be alive as a cricket journalist, because we're writing about more aspects, more dimensions of cricket than we did. The game itself has changed probably more in the last 10 years than it did in the preceding 30. And if you have any sort of feeling for epoch-making change, this is a great time to be alive.
I just wanted to sort of ask you also, Ayaz, that when you say literary writing, I mean, what is it that we are looking for? Also, what happens in India is that you're working with a completely different set of subjects. What you always find is that when you were growing up in the 80s and 90s, I started working when in college in the 80s, all your frames of references were Western. They were tennis, baseball, basketball, boxing, Muhammad Ali, and so on. But you realize when you're working, you're not dealing with athletes that are speaking to you in English. You know, you're not dealing with them giving you quotes like Muhammad Ali's pearls. But they're saying things to you in another language and another medium which you need to be able to understand. So sometimes you feel frustrated that you can't speak Kannada or you can't speak Malayalam because you'll never understand what they're saying. And you just feel relieved that an athlete is able to speak to you in Hindi and you can communicate with them in Hindi. You have another language because then you see another view of what the sporting world sort of means. So I just wonder what this, literary doesn't mean are you writing poems? You know?
Of course not. No, I think the premise, as I understood it for this discussion, is that the quality, the standard of writing is really, when you say literary, means the literary standard that you put out is of a certain quality. And I think the frame of reference there was largely English cricket writers, starting from Carter's down, and many of them. And whether we stand anywhere, and I have a point of view on that. One is that and we have such little information of what's happening in the regional languages. There is a very kind of insulated, snobbish group of English-speaking and writing cricket journalists in India who think or thought that they knew everything, but perhaps that's not true. So that's one part. The other is that Indian writing itself has evolved. There is an Indian way of communicating in English today, which is not necessarily Fingleton or Cardus or Ray Robinson or whoever else, or Gideon Haigh, if I may add. It's very
happy to be reckoned with those, but for a long time, English cricket writing was the touchstone, even in Australia. To compliment an Australian cricket writer, you would say he's as good as an English cricket writer.
Maybe just a little before you joined the profession, when we would sit in the Mumbai Press Club, and when we discuss sports writing, it would be, have you read Esquire, the profile of so-and-so, or that interview in Playboy, which might run into 20 pages, and you always thought, how the hell can I ever, or one can ever manage to write that? But having said that,
can I just make a sort of a little interruption here? Last one. There was we used to go to the press box in Calcutta at the Eden Gardens for test matches, and there was to be, I don't know if there's anyone from Calcutta here in the audience. Not of that generation for sure. There used to be a gentleman, tall, wearing a dhoti kurta, and we thought, okay, senior journalist, old guys, to sit in a corner, watch the match, write his report. His name was Moti Nandi, and apparently he had written about 50 novels in Bengali around sport. 50. And now you'll get a couple of translations, and you can see, and you just think that you have been robbed because you don't know the language, because you don't understand. And he was telling you about athletes' lives, and some of the books are now available in translation. A couple or two or three of them I've read. And you just wish that you had spoken to him and that you knew who he was and you'd asked him about his life.
Oh, absolutely.
And what
he was an iconic figure, but very little known about him. But the point I think is moving ahead from where we are today. Would you write for what you think is your audience, or would you write what you think is what you need to write? Gideon made this point at the start that he writes it as he sees it and what he knows. These are his observations, this is his skill, this is what he puts out. Or would you make a conscious effort to say, this is my audience, this is what perhaps they need or they want, and therefore I must adapt myself?
I think audiences find it difficult to actually express exactly what they want, in the same way as consumers find it difficult to articulate exactly what they want. Consumers always want cheaper and more colourful versions of what they already have. I think your obligation as a sports journalist is to put into print what you would like to see and to persuade the audience to buy into that at the same time. I think sometimes we're a bit cowardly where journalism is concerned. We say, well, the audience won't accept that. The audience won't like it. And actually, since the advent of these quite powerful analytical tools which enable us to sort of understand in greater depth what our readers are consuming, we think as though we've got an insight into their thoughts, but sometimes their thoughts are incoherent and incomplete.
Yeah.
They're looking for a writer to put into their minds the words that they would like to express themselves.
Yeah. Sharda?
I think you write basically, from my point of view, is you write what you see, and you would want to put it down in as plain language as possible, as simple, because I think now there is a glut of information. Like Gideon is saying, there is so much writing available, but what is sometimes either missing is just clarity. So you try and find that clarity. You don't find it all the time. You look for it, and just try and be as clear as you can about something or someone or what it is. So you just write it because it has to be written. It's like a sharing thing. Sometimes it might be too. We've got very good editors at Cricinfo, so they sort it out when you're trying to get too poetic or whatever it is. But you just write it as you see it, because often you find that the plain truths are never said. It's just said in a way that is, jalebi, what we call jalebi. So.
And I think there's still a surfeit of cricket writing that's involved in reporting what happened the day before. There's a huge bulk of cricket writing that's a mile wide and an inch deep, and consists of telling people what they've already seen. Yeah. I'm not sure that even now newspapers have really adapted to the visual economy or the ubiquity of information. It's fascinating to me that my newspaper in Australia will still devote 2 broadsheet pages to reporting a day's play of Test cricket. Now, I love Test cricket, but there is a limit to how efficacious that is for the reader. It's not really taking the reader any place that they didn't expect to go already.
So one of the things which has happened maybe in the last 10, 15 years, and as you mentioned, there's a surfeit of reporters, but what has really happened is there's a huge amount of data coming through. And that is becoming staple rather than, I think Cricinfo has struck a wonderful balance. So there's a lot of data and stats and, facts and factoids and this, that and the other, which is there at the click of a mouse. And there's also some fantastic writing to read. But by and large, it seems, because data makes it so easy. Yes. You juxtapose data with everything, every 3 sentences, and you've got 800 words ready.
You can prove almost anything.
You can prove almost
data,
anything, yeah.
Do you know the great quote about data? There's a great quote which turned up in an Anil Kumble column, which I now frequently repeat. I hope I remember it. It says, data is not information, information is not knowledge, and knowledge is not wisdom. Yeah. So that's the sort of the thing that you think that you're looking for. I mean, just to go back to your original question, sometimes you ask yourselves, do people really, as a customer, do people really want to read the sentimental stuff? Because sometimes you think that that's what works, and people respond to it immediately. Do they want to read the sentimental stuff, or do they want to read the thing that is not so pretty, but it is there, it's a fact, it's out there, and it should be said? So that's the kind of doubt sometimes you have, that sometimes it gets easier to write the sentimental stuff than to write the difficult thing. Yeah.
I think another area that's expanded considerably to the beneficiation of the game is the idea of holding administrators accountable for their actions. Yes. I think Sharda is a really fine example of this, someone who covers the BCCI with such incredible rigour and honesty in a very difficult and problematic environment. It's very difficult to say exactly what you think in India, because the BCCI is so powerful and has such a monopoly over access. But Sharda has carved out a very large niche and been an example to other writers.
Yes, I think there are many dimensions that have come up just beyond watching what's happening on the field of play. My own take on this is that today, if you want to be a cricket writer in India, you have to have enough knowledge of the law. You have to be a chartered accountant. It would help if you were also a forensic expert.
People used to say to me, "What an unusual
and above all, if
interest. You're a business journalist and a cricket journalist." It's not so unusual anymore.
Yes. So, Sharda, having seen through more than 2 decades now, in the evolutionary path that you see in cricket writing, the trajectory, has it changed for you at all? In fact, I think the Indian media has been, in that sense, more dynamic, not necessarily right or incorrect, or which no value judgment there, but it's been far more dynamic than any other media in the cricket world. So, how are you seeing the evolution?
I think what has shaken all of us in print particularly has been television, and the sort of the way cricket and other sports are reported. But like, you're right, it's been much more dynamic. There is a certain I don't know whether it's an ability or whether it's a certain, almost it's like a something that you feel you need to do, a challenging of authority, which happens very, very effortlessly here in India. In some ways you don't challenge superstardom. You know, in some ways there are sacred cows that you will not touch. But in some ways you challenge authority all the time, whether it's through television or through print. In print writing particularly, I think there is definitely, like you said, there is this multi-faceted layer of information that you have to find and understand, and, you know, crime and all the kinds of things. Rediff is great because it has the entire copy of the CBI 2000 report on match fixing. The entire stuff is up there. You need to just log it and save it and keep it. And so you have access to a lot of information, but then you should be able to call out. And like I said, again, you keep coming back to clarity, that there has to be clarity. At the same time, you find a lot of the times in India, we've tended to take sides of, say, the BCCI versus the ICC. You get into that whole fight. You know, you tend to be far more, I don't know whether it's far more, if you're talking about Australia and England as well, if it came down to Monkey Gate or whatever, then the press started taking sides with their team and so on. So there is a certain sort of a conflict, almost like, what is the right thing? What are you going to, you know, what is the correct story? What's the more accurate story? And I remember when that whole Monkey Gate thing was going on, everyone said, oh, Tendulkar told lies to the judge, or whatever that was, at the hearing. And you say, which Australian cricketer would not have done exactly the same thing to protect his teammate? You know, if you turn the situation around, exactly the same thing would have happened. Had someone been, you know, had Harbhajan been the person who was being called for by an Australian, would not the Australian's teammate have stood up for him? Of course he would have. So there is that whole, it's like those questions keep coming up from time to time. And I guess at Cricinfo, what it helps is because you are supposed to be this nationless sort of voice, and you belong only to the planet of cricket.
In any case, I think good journalism is always challenging authority or any powerful institution.
Comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So let's move a little ahead or a little backwards. So, you know, as holding both of you up as fine exponents of cricket writing, what helped you? What are the things that you used? Was it, you know, you were a business journalist who's become a cricket writer. She's a great sub, I can tell you that, at the desk. And she's turned out to be an equally fine writer across disciplines. So is it reading books, I'm sure that people want to know some drills. There are some aspiring writers who would want to know how you build up your repertoire for writing.
Gideon writes at an insane pace. Gideon has written more books than anybody I know, short of Dickens or somebody.
Well, I started young. I wrote my first book when I was 20, and it helps to not know
He's
how
the
much.
Tendulkar of
and it
writing.
helps to not know how much you don't know. It helps. Youth is sort of full of ignorant bluster, and I took full advantage of that to make all the mistakes that I needed to make. You only learn by making mistakes.
Yeah.
And I guess the first cricket book I wrote was about Kerry Packer's World Series cricket, a book called The Cricket War. And that was quite interesting because that was an exercise in sort of revisiting my own childhood, because I'd lived through that. That was the period of cricket where I sort of fell in love with the game, and where it seemed suddenly terribly exciting that there was cricket on 2 channels in Australia. It was revolutionary. So the idea that my own past had become history, or that I was sort of somehow that I'd seen history change and I was now coming back to review it, gave me a sort of a consciousness of how historical processes take place. And it also gave me an education in talking to cricketers. I went around and I interviewed sort of 50 players who'd played during World Series cricket, and it gave me an idea of the cricketer's perspective, what they remember about the experience of playing in games, what they forget, how they jumble things up, and how often in a team game they're much happier to talk about other players rather than themselves. The idea of sort of attracting or sort of grandstanding or making the story about a tale of their own egocentricity. Perhaps to that generation, it didn't necessarily come naturally. The idea of asking them a direct question, I realised that you actually had to be a little bit more indirect in your inquiries if you were going to get the best out of them.
There's no, I think just practice the sort of the...
Headstand, handstand, practice what?
No, just, I mean, a lot of reading. And one of the great things that one of the younger journalists, former colleagues at Cricinfo, Sriram Veera, said, every time you're doing an interview and the guy stops and you think he hasn't answered what you want to say, just stay quiet. It's very difficult. Because you just have to be very quiet, because then the person tries to fill in the silence and starts talking again. And that's very tough. But like, you learn new tricks as you go. You can actually teach an old dog new tricks. Yeah. And that's a thing that you learn. And I think a certain amount of respect for the fact that the person that you're interviewing is much better at what you did, as not me as an athlete who's absolutely useless, but on the level of everyone around you that you knew, they're far better, and their understanding of it is also far better, and you should ask them about that. A lot of the times you're told that, oh, Indian cricketers don't want to talk, they don't want to explain, they don't want to say. So no, you need to just ask them the right question in the right way. I went to interview a fast bowler and I talked to him for about 45 minutes, and he wasn't giving me, for India Today, he wasn't giving me the story, like the golden ticket kind of thing. And after 40 minutes, he did. But it took 40 minutes. But you just have to be very patient. It's all the things that you learn in journalism. You should be ready to wait. You should be patient. You should leave your ego aside. And like he said, asking people questions not about themselves. So in the early 2000s, Tendulkar was it was very difficult to get him to talk and so on. So I called him up once again for India Today, called him up on the phone and said, I'm doing an article on VVS Lakshman, can I speak to you about him? He said, yes, of course, right now. And then he said whatever he had to say. He told a great story and everything. So it's that, because he was probably used to people coming at him the whole time asking him, what makes you great? How come you're such a great player? Do you not get angry? He was happy to talk about Lakshman for 15 minutes, as long as I wasn't asking him about himself. So there are all these things that you learn as you go along. You realize that every athlete is as insecure, as greedy as an ex-person. They're not saints. I think you realize that pretty fast. Yeah. But they always have a story to tell.
It's been an enormous benefit to me to go on playing cricket. I still play cricket. I'm 51 years old. I'm carrying a broken finger at the moment because I'm getting to that stage where attempted caught and bowls are acts of deliberate self-harm these days. But there was a period in my life, probably for about 5 years, where I didn't play cricket. And the minute that I went back to playing cricket, I realised this is why I love it. It's a player's game, fundamentally. Yeah.
So this may seem a question peculiar to Indian cricket writers, but I think it's applicable even to Aussies, because the English literature or cricket literature in English is very flush. There's just now the number of books is mind-boggling. It's not true in Australia as much, certainly not. And in India, there's been a dearth. Actually, we have a very poor sense of history or documenting. May have changed now that we are into the cashless and paperless age. But otherwise, we don't seem to record. It's all oral and verbal and spoken and anecdotes. Nothing of documentation.
And told amongst each other.
Do you think that has led to what is loosely said, that there's not enough literary heft in Indian cricket writing?
I think maybe, I'll just interrupt, and maybe there is in English. We don't know what is there in other languages. Genuinely we don't know. Yeah. I mean, maybe there's nothing, maybe there are thousands of things that we don't know about. I think Gideon should tell everyone the story of Vasant Rai ji, who's the historian who told him that set off the book that you wrote. I mean,
the very first book ever written about Victor Trumper was written here by a guy called Vasant Raiji in the early 1960s, which fascinates me. A man who never played in India, who never even visited India, so inspired a cricket lover that he filled a yawning gap in cricket's library. A gap that we never got around to filling in Australia until 100 years after Trumper was born.
Yeah, he also had the largest collection of books that I've seen.
Yeah, and so there are people who have put out these little books. Vasant Raiji is one example. He has these little history books about the Parsis and India's Hambledon men, and so there is a recording of it in a certain way. It's not as celebrated or as wide as England. Maybe the readers are not that many. I think what happened with because of sort of the story of Trumper and everything that we read. I remember when I was very young, I got a little. It was like a booklet about the great cricketers. And there you had the stories of Alan Davidson and Don Bradman and Vinu Mankat. And it's this little, you used to buy it at railway stations. And I remember it so clearly. Alan Davidson took a wicket off his first ball and a wicket off his last ball. And it stayed stuck in my head. And that's why when I went to Australia for the first time, I was shocked that there was no statue of Victor Trumper in Sydney. That was not there. I said, how could that be?
I can remember trying to get Indian cricket books in Australia when I was growing up. Trying to get something like Tiger's Tale by Tiger Patowdy or M.V. Gottschalker's The Burning Finger, one of my favourite titles, or Sandy Storm by Sandy Patil, or The Winning Hand, the book about Chandrasekhar. These books were fantastically exotic to an Australian.
Yes.
Or Vijay Hazari's Cricket Replayed, or Ajit Wadakar's autobiography.
My cricketing years.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely loved those books. Precisely because they were so hard to get a hold of, you felt a real achievement when eventually you did land them, and because you had so much in common with them, and they were so much different at the same time.
And all those books at that time were written with so much of freedom. I mean, in sunny days, Gavaskar had a go at everybody.
Yeah.
People will not have a go at now. They were written completely without a fear of anyone. And these were people who were dependent on patrons and employers and as much as anyone
Gavaskar
else.
was exceptional in many ways. I mean, he wrote his books as he played his cricket. He had
During the
fantastic
game.
memory. He would, when he was playing, he would jot down every mistake he's made and every good thing he's done, every good stroke he's played. And likewise, he did for players he's met and incidents that have happened, and he had the bandwidth and the energy to write it in
himself,
in longhand in those days.
And interestingly, one of the very first important Indian cricket books is written by an Australian. That's Richard Cashman's book, Patrons, Players and the Crowds. So there's a long kind of abiding association between, basically we are two colonial countries, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I always found Australian writing, that was Fingleton and Mike Coward, far more refreshing than English writing, and it was the same way that it's literally like it was before sort of all the fighting began and all the other stuff, that you felt kindred because it was us against the English. And there's a story, I don't even know if it's true, I think of it as a literary story. I don't know where it comes from, maybe my dad, maybe my grandfather, that when Don Bradman's record for the maximum number of runs in an innings was broken, some record, people wore black bands in India. I don't even know if the story is true. Out of mourning that an Englishman had taken it. So I've forgotten what the record is. A very interesting fact that now, while you do have a lot of books that are there about all our athletes, Saina, Sanya, and everyone, an Indian cricketer said to me at some point, he was thinking about doing his book, and should I not, and what do you want to write, and so on. And I said, no, you'll have to say, the uncomfortable thing. You have to say the things that people want to read about, not necessarily sensational, but true, reflections of what actually happened. And he said, look, that was a long time ago. I said, yeah, but it happened and you felt bad. And he said, yeah. He said, but why did I play cricket? Did I play it to make friends or did I play it to sell books? And he's never written a book. He's not written that book still. So maybe the environment in which Indian cricket of a particular generation has functioned, they feel that maybe they don't need to make enemies. It's fine. We played cricket to make friends, not to sell books.
I have a fair idea of who you were talking about, but
I do too.
no, but I think so. So there is a bug in the argument, and which is the bugbear, and that is the premise of this, that it does not necessarily need to be a cricketer who's writing his, story for cricket writing to be rich. It could be Sharda Ugra writing about, her innings. It does not necessarily have to depend on a player who wanted to make friends and influence people and not make enemies. But the fact remains that some things happened where, it was not all hunky-dory, as we all know. And that could come through. And that adds to the, the dimensions of the sport, which is followed so extensively in India. And it's true of every other country.
Well, you can't complain about me not writing books.
No, not
I'm
you.
always sticking my neck out. But Sharda on the other hand, and Sambit too, I'm constantly chiding Sambit for not having written the book that he's capable of. You just got to have a go.
I'm just being a ghost at the moment. I enjoy being a ghost. Yeah.
So, what were your strongest influences in cricket writing? Apart from Sambit Bal.
Peter Roebuck. I think because of the simplicity of his writing, that he was able to say fantastic things in the most simple and the clearest language possible. whether he's talking technique or whether he's talking personality or whether he's talking incident, even though he goes and says, pack of dogs. And I'm sure if one of us had written that, we would have been scratched out in cricket for that, please, now don't be, our offices will catch fire, stop it. So I think Peter Roebuck, because of just the clarity, you can't write like him. You can't, So, but I read his books about being, and Mike Marquez also, because he said things that, he said, of course you're always a fan, but watching sport cannot be a vacation from critical thought. So I think definitely both of them. I love K.N. Prabhu's sort of the manner in which he sort of wrote about cricket, and he talked about cricket. He was a great talker of cricket. And Rajan Bala as well. I didn't read him as much because the Hindu wasn't published in Bombay, and I read...
He wrote quite a few books.
About Prasanna and all the beautiful boys, and And so a lot of, I think, I took great pride in the fact that there was, maybe it was some history thing because I was a history student and I said everything cannot be great about the English and whatever it was, and English cricket and everything. But yeah, I mean, I have friends in English cricket, as they say. But I essentially sort of writing that was speaking to me from a point of view that was not the traditional point of view that you got in the papers or through Times or Sunday Times or whatever it was, whether you read it in Sports Week or whether you read it in Sports Star. So basically a lot of writing like that.
Gideon?
Well, Roebuck's is actually, I think, significant from an Australian perspective because he was one of the first, because he was an Englishman, he was capable of taking chances in Australian newspapers that I don't think Australian newspapermen would have been game to. He was a very fresh and zesty and original voice in Australia in the 1980s when I was growing up as a newspaper reader. But I think probably the main influences on me have not been cricket writers, have just been my favourite novelists and my favourite sort of essayists, and I've tried not to think in terms of what's already existed in cricket writing because there's no point in me doing that. It's already been done.
Yeah.
What about you, Ayaz? How difficult was it to break the sort of English thing that bent on you? Because you're a generation and a half older than me, generation, whatever.
I mean, I am not such a spontaneous writer, I must admit. So I read a lot of, I was a very avid reader of cricket books from C.L.R. James and Cardus and all the way down, what we call from the classicists to the neoclassicists to the modern voices. But, obviously, I think if you're into journalism, basically, you try and look for something a little more. Or if you want to do some quality work, you want to look a little more beyond just the, wonderful square drive. There's only twice or thrice you can say it. You can't repeat that again and again. So I think the idea is to try and grab as much as you can of the flavor, the mood, the tenor, the color of what you see, not just the game, but the people, the controversies as they've grown more and more, and try and, make it as delightful for the reader or palatable for the reader as possible. But I think what has been the biggest constraint, and this predates the digital age to an extent, and this is where I think, the websites, and especially something like Cricket Info, have been wonderful. In TOI, for instance, where I worked for 5 years, there was, so, it was 300 words to reports. What do you write in 300 words? And if Monkey Gate happens, what do you write? So you had to necessarily then refashion, or at least the reporters had to do it. And the logic was that you'll get corresponding pieces from Steve Waugh, Alan Border, so and so, and that is the buffet system for the reader. The reader will pick and choose what he wants. So I think in many ways that affected cricket writing in the English press, at least in India, adversely.
But
apart from those who...
Independent was a bit different at that time.
Independent was, much earlier. This is before the shift happened. So guys like Prem or, Sambit, certainly in the digital age, and everybody else who's grown up in that umbrella, and now more and more, other platforms, the sheer breadth of expression led to, I would imagine, also adding then depth. First you get that little breadth, and then you add more depth to it. Otherwise you're stuck with 300 words, you Google out, and you have a very early day, you can pack up and go home very early. But I think it was different in the language vernacular, from what I gather, more and more. The more journalists I've met from the Malayalam press or the Bengali press.
50 novels. I mean, 50. Imagine if an English writer had written 50 novels about sport in India.
The other thing which I feel, and which is where I think Gideon really stands out in the current era, is that even in amongst hardcore journalists in India, there's very little ambition or the need for research. There's no reading into the past. You know, there is a certain correlation and association that can be made, and it just adds so much value to whatever you write. This is not just a one-off event. A Virat Kohli making so many runs is not just a one-off event. There is a passing of the baton from a Gavaskar to a Tendulkar to a Virat.
And how does India produce all these batsmen,
you know,
of a particular type? And
if you don't have, if your mind is a blank from 2004 onwards, then there's not much that you can do.
We were all sitting at Cricinfo yesterday watching a replay of the last IPL final, and everyone was sitting around going, what happened next? We can't remember. It's almost like we've developed these sort of goldfish memories to go with a goldfish memory game.
So we'll have to have some questions from the audience, but I want to know your opinions as to what can be done to improve. And I don't mean this in a condescending way, but what you genuinely feel. You don't have to be patronizing. But what do you think needs to be done for cricket writing now? There are the newspapers. Some of them are coming back to at least some form of long writing, longhand, or long writing, long reads, because they've got more space.
Yeah.
And I think there is a certain demand coming back for good quality again. I sense it. It may take a little while. Certainly in the digital platform, there's enough scope, and there's a demand for good quality writing. So what needs to be done? And this is particular, not just the Indian point of view.
We're calling out the Aussie press, Gideon.
Even the Aussies.
Yeah. I don't really have strong views about that, but I do where my own writing is concerned. You know, I'd like to think that I will be a better writer in a year's time than I am at present. You should be working constantly to improve. You should be constantly sort of trying to broaden your influences. You should be doing fresh things, new things. It's very easy in this game to slip into a rut and just go back to doing that thing that people want you to do.
Are you clued into everything that is happening in the cricket world? Are you a very kind of inquisitorial cricket writer? Abreast with what's happening in Zimbabwe, Bangladesh, West Indies?
Probably the more that you know, or the more sort of historical background that you have, the more the information that's passing you by will have a context to fit into. It doesn't necessarily require you to be sort of on point all the time, or constantly on your guard, constantly vigilant. But if you've got a sense of an evolving narrative, then events that you're experiencing will make a great deal more sense.
Yeah. Sharda?
I think what can be done to improve cricket writing sounds like a great sort of responsibility that you have to be. I think just to start with tighter language, and I think maybe
better desk?
A better desk really, really helps if you have a better desk that's able to say, and also to be able to call out, okay, now this is, again, journalism stroke writing, is that everyone has sources that will tell you things. But literally often you find in papers that there is a particular source telling you giving you a particular story for a particular reason. It's not the whole story. And this whole thing has happened, when the BCCI stuff was going on. You're reading the papers and say, but this is not true. You cannot say this. This is not right. It's not the whole story. You need to tell your reader the whole story. So I think a better desk, I think maybe editors need to be stricter, even though it's popular to get that stuff out and it'll stir the pot and the lawyer can wave it out in court and so on. I think that's basically, it's like a basic journalistic function that needs to be tightened a little bit again. That's not to say that we are perfect and we are great and whatever. No, we've all got our blind spots and we've all got our bugbears and need to battle it and fight it and try and find. But the fundamental thing about, I think, journalism, as I keep coming back to, as opposed to writing, because I think writing is Ernest Hemingway and journalism is everybody else, doing the... what's it called, legwork.
There was you'll bear it out with me, but Gideon might not know. But there was always this very nuanced difference between a cricket journalist and a cricket writer.
Yes, completely. And I'm very proud always to say that I'm a cricket journalist, or a sports journalist to start with. that I was always very proud of that. But I think that your sort of journalistic fundamental is curiosity.
Yeah.
But to ask, but why, but how, but so that's the thing. And once you have material, you can put it into any language, and someone will help you put into a good language. Sometimes that material is hard to get as a journalist, and we always think of journalists always think of writers as sort of little, sitting armchair. Sorry, Gideon, not you. Sort of armchair kind of a response to whatever. It's not sort of the legwork that comes in. So there is a bit of a dilemma that exists, and I would like the journalism to be much tighter and much more curious and much more engaged. And I think the writing will automatically follow. Whatever that may be, I think that will automatically follow.
One thing that I've done over the last season. I sort of got to the start of the season. I thought, well, we often generalise about what we believe players think or players' attitudes are, but how often do we really actually ask them? And it's frustrated me over the course of my career to see how artificial and sterilised the interaction is between athlete and journalist. So I did set out at the start of this season in Australia to do an in-depth interview with a player a week, just an interesting player who I felt might have something worthwhile to say. And I've been pleasantly surprised at how considered and thoughtful and perceptive the responses have been to asking of really quite simple questions about players trying to orient themselves in this very, very fast-changing world, coming to terms with the fact that they now have a great many more career options than they had 10 years ago, but still fundamentally driven by a love for the game and a desire to protect the game at the same time, which leads me to causes me concern that administrators now pay so little attention to what players think. The administrator's attitude is the attitude that Hitchcock used to have to dealing with actors: pay them heaps and treat them like cattle. I actually think if you do pin a player down and ask them how they see the game at present, you can learn an awful lot.
Yeah. No, and Rohit is not here, but something very interesting he told me, and I learned from that. And this is not like 30 years back. This is maybe 3 months back in Mumbai. And I saw him do it in the 2012 Olympics. That after an event, when there would be a press conference, not many Indians were there, but even the athletes like Usain Bolt or somebody who's lost, he would be there right till the end. A lot of people, what you mentioned, would imagine what this guy would have told them, and it's put in the copy and it's gone, because you feel that you've been there, you've seen it, you've done it, and how can it change? But actually it changes from person to person. And what you get, that little extra, that little nugget, is what can make
that is India
story.
Today training.
That's
India Today training, because you were writing for 3 days later for it to be fresh 10 days from when it was written.
But I have one, and this is a concern for as much for me as it would be for everybody else. I think, at least where cricket writing is concerned, but it's true of everything else in Indian life today, we've become very inward-looking. It's only, and I don't know what it's like in Australia, but in that sense we're not very different now from the Americans. They're also very inward-looking. We have become very inward-looking. So, some of the finest profiles one has read in cricket, for instance, from, say, a Cardis, would be about a George Hadley or a Leary Constantine. In the 30s, when they were, they were very odd, very small country coming to play for the first time. You will never find that in Indian papers today. It's all about Kohli and Ashwin and Dhoni, and the whole world revolves around that. Maybe a couple of big players from Australia, but suppose there is Bangladesh or a Zimbabwe, you will never get to read a great profile of a Zimbabwe player. And not in the websites, but in the newspapers.
And that's where I think the editors have to be called out, but the editors will then call out their super editors and say that, is this the question that you're going to be asked? I worked for India Today for 10 years, and I was asked only once to do this profile of Muralidharan when I had gone to Sri Lanka for a tour. And it was a joy, because it was absolutely dead easy to be able to chat to so many people and get it. But once in 10 years is when they said, Swapan Das Gupta was at that time, he was my boss, and he said, okay, you've gone to Sri Lanka, the most obvious thing to do is to do a feature or a profile or whatever of Muralidharan. But that's only once in 10 years. And then everyone's looking for your winner or your champion.
Fortunately, he was a cricket lover, Swapan.
Yes,
so, otherwise some other editor would have told you to interview Azharuddin.
It's actually possible as these domestic leagues grow and sort of displace international cricket in importance, that will become more parochial.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the bigger danger, and this will be my last question before we open up, the bigger danger seems to be, much like the politicians now in the US or India, they find the media completely dispensable.
Yes.
So too, at least cricketers from the leading countries, they see no reason why you should be there around at all. Have you seen us not play? That's enough.
Yeah.
You know, and get on with it.
Some players for a while sort of thought that social media would give them the
Correct.
opportunity to engage directly with the public.
I don't necessarily blame the players. I think it stems from the administration.
Or their PR managers.
Well, you know, it's all enmeshed. But do you see that as an issue, as a constraint, as something which is not helping develop a story better?
For these pieces that I've done this season, on 2 or 3 occasions I've had to go through official channels to get access to the player, and it's become like death by email. Almost impossible. That once a level of bureaucrats get involved, things become exponentially more difficult. But frankly, if I made contact with the player directly, they were very easy to deal with. They're actually quite confident, I think, in a media environment. They've grown up in a media-saturated society. They're pretty confident about their having something to say. They're conscious of living through interesting times. You know, they've got a long enough memory to realise that things are changing very fast, and that these are unusual experiences, and they're interesting things to talk about.
Also, it differs from personality to personality. I think
like
Virat is so, so candid
Ayaz?
and so expressive.
Yeah.
Unlike Dhoni, who was very introverted.
Who would you want to interview, say today, if you wanted to go and profile someone or meet someone? Who would that
From
be?
the Indian team?
Anywhere, anyone in cricket.
I mean, personally, I would want to interview at this point in time in Ashwin, at this point in time, for the kind of achievements he's had in the past. At this point in time, I would also want to meet Alistair Cook. So, you know.
What happens with sort of access that you're shutting? You know, it does get frustrating at some point that you're not able to speak to somebody or ask them a question or whatever. But it's almost, this is just something that's come out by habit, that it's almost that the people that are on the fringes have the more interesting stories to tell. I mean, I'll never forget, I read an article that Srinam Veera had written in the Indian Express about Praveen Kumar.
Yes.
And I said, you know, this sounds like a completely fascinating individual,
Yes.
and one must go and meet him. And I did go to Meerut, and he was just the most, he's not the other thing that I find in Indian cricket writing or sports journalism or whatever, is that it's so much easy to get access to someone who speaks English and is comfortable, but it's the other people that are not as conventional in their personality that you find are maybe difficult to get to. You know, you don't want to make the effort of sort of trying to speak in their language or convince them. They don't care that you're an English language journalist because they don't read you, it doesn't bother them, but their world is a lot more interesting than the other worlds that you may be familiar with or writing with. So it was like that, and he had this great, his impression of cricket. Everyone asked cricketers, what is the legacy that you would like to leave? Praveen Kumar had no legacy. He had a very honest understanding of what cricket was about. He respected it. He said, the game has given me a lot. It's my livelihood. And there it ended. And he had respect. I said, what did you like about playing in England? He said, I liked the fact that you could actually engage with the crowd. And the crowd booed you when you tried to bowl a bouncer at their batsman. But he said they were fine. I liked the fact that there was, wood on the walls at the Lords. I thought the Lords dressing rooms were very small. And so this was another way in which an Indian cricketer was seeing cricket. He wasn't thinking of Ranji and Vijay Merchant and all the rest of it. This was his view of what the sport means to him, which is, I think, it exists all across Indian athletes because they come from very different backgrounds than urban and,
And good on them. But so this leads me to a question which has been a complaint against a lot of cricket writers, that their imagination actually exceeds than what they've actually seen or what they've been told. A lot of cricketers may have been bounders who Neville Cardus clothed in the most, flowery prose and said, wow, wonderful things about them. And they may have been, goons, for all we know. So is that, do you see that, still existing, or do you think it's more transparent today, more honest?
I think they're obviously exposed to a great many more cultural influences than the players of Carter's generation. You know, a Wilfred Rhodes or an Emmett Robinson could be defined by their experiences in a pretty sequestered world of county cricket. The players these days lead quite extraordinary lives. Going to interview Daniel Christian the other day, who's played in 5 different states in Australia, has played for 5 different counties and 2 different BBL franchises, to ask him the question, what's the difference between a successful dressing room and an unsuccessful dressing room, is a very interesting philosophical question, because he has a very broad range of experiences to draw on, and he has clearly thought about these things very closely. Because it is a team sport, and it is all about your relationships, and it is all about the peculiar chemistry that brings about success, that constantly causes us to wonder. These are fun areas to speculate in. Really, the limits of a player's imagination these days, well, they've got less reason to be limited in their imagination than previous generations.
Sharda, do you think there's ever been a constraint? Because I think, at least from the Indian media point of view, for a long while, there was this awe about English writers. And when I say English writers, I don't mean K.N. Prabhu and everybody else, but English writers and English players and Aussie players. And, you know, I mean, Jeff Boycott came to India in hunt of a record, walked off in the middle of a series, went to South Africa, and then came back as a commentator and said, everybody, whatever you all guys are doing is wrong, you know. And we lapped it up. And paid him big bucks for it.
You masochists.
So,
do you feel that those times have changed? That there is
I definitely think those times have changed, because a lot of that has to do with the fact that I would like to think, okay, we are far more confident bunch of journalists and so on, and that India is but it's basically because India is a rich cricketing country, as in wealthy rich, not as in we're not counting about our historical wealth as such. That has changed the dynamic with which the rest of the world looks at India. So it's almost like we've become the America of international cricket. Some of it is not attractive, because then you know, you've had the BCCI bullying people and so on. But and some of them, when you hear things, I mean, the Jeff Boycott was absolutely the perfect example. Because I remember, I don't know, you were in Midday at the time, that we had to go and pay him money for writing a column, which is a professional service, and he would not speak until the envelope was handed over to him with cash. You know, so that whole thing, it's like our generation hated it. We absolutely despised it, you know, at the way that came at India and Indian cricketers and so on. And it's almost like sometimes we felt, and often I still feel, that maybe we underplay our cricketers a little bit, and we won't, you know, we don't, I won't take names of cricketers from other countries, it's not fair. But it's like, I think our cricketers, we should celebrate our cricketers more. Then the contrarian thought is, maybe I'm just being too jingoistic and this thing, but you're looking at other stuff and saying, but look at his record, and look at so-and-so's record. So there is that sort of interplay that's happening.
Some of that found expression even in the ICC politics, isn't it?
Yes, completely.
The officials from the BCCI.
Yeah, this was done to us. That's not the reason with which, I mean, what nonsense, you know. I mean, it is done to you. So
no, but I'm saying if it could exist in the media, it would exist in other Indians. You know, I mean, we have to make an allowance for that. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying it did exist.
Yes, yes, definitely. It did exist, and you did see it. And at one point in time, you sort of switched yourself off and paid no attention to it. And in that whole, even amongst, say, British reporters or whatever, we always found the Australians more easy to talk to and more accessible, like when I was in my 20s and so on. So there was that, everything was going on in the 90s, you know, that was happening in the 90s. And now when you look at it, people think everyone wants to come and play IPL. We are the richest country in the world, so why are they not? So then, and you can actually see the ugliness in it, because you've seen the other side of it 20 years ago. You've seen that happening in a really not very pretty way, you know, not very...
Okay, I think we will meander into many other areas, so let's stop here and take some questions from the audience. I see a couple of hands. Mr. Nostalgia.
Good afternoon. You, ma'am, mentioned one thing, that journalist, he needs to be curious. Unfortunately, I feel what has happened is, in India, game has become, or the board has become so rich, I doubt how many journalists can really be inquisitive, can really be curious. You also said that Sunil Gavaskar lambasted everybody in his sunny days. But as an administrator, post-retirement, I don't think he has uttered even a single word when it comes to all the wrongs in BCCI. Similarly, I remember in 2001, when Sachin Tendulkar was suspended by Mike Dennis, there was a press conference and Mike Dennis refused to answer any questions. And Ravi Shastri rose up and he pointedly asked Mike Dennis, if you are not answering any questions here, why are you present here? Sorry, why are you present here? Now the same Ravi Shastri, when MS Dhoni refused to answer any questions on the eve of departure of Champions Trophy just after the CSK scandal, no one raised a whimper. So BCCI, I feel, has grown so rich, so powerful, you cannot utter a single contradictory statement, let alone being critical.
No, are you talking about players or are you talking about media?
If this is the case of players, imagine BCCI when it controls someone in Star Sports or even in Crick Info. I know you have been a very
Can I
BCCI controls no one in cricket.
not directly.
One second.
Try to understand what I'm saying.
Can I request you to ask your questions, because
my question is,
what are you saying?
My question is, if journalists cannot be inquisitive or curious,
yes,
that is also in a way affecting the standards, literary
Correct.
standards. Just one more point. I am seeing Sachin Tendulkar's autobiography. Now, I am of the same age as Sachin Tendulkar, 1 month elder to him. I have seen his debut.
What's the question?
I have seen his entire career. Now, I don't find any joy in reading Sachin Tendulkar's autobiography.
Correct.
So unless he speaks his mind, so whether it is a player or a journalist,
point
that
taken.
Inquisitiveness is not there, and that is hampering the standards, literary standards as far as cricket is concerned.
Autobiography is his book now, what he wants to put out. You can't.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, I'm saying it's not a biography, it's an autobiography.
Today there are so many restrictions as far as cricket writer is concerned.
Any other question? We can't hear you.
I have been following your column, Khalid Ansari's column, since so many years, and I used to love all these columns and the way you describe the cricket in those years. Nowadays, I find after the day of the match, there are 8 to 10 cricket players who write a column. Many of them are ghost-written. And and they talk about more of controversies and who has to do what. And the real description of cricket, what you used to give at your time, you, Kane, Prabhu, Khalid Ansari, that doesn't come nowadays. I'd like to have your views on this.
I think there's a certain marquee value. This is, I think, what readers want to read. That's the explanation that is given. That you've got star value over there, and if there is a Alan Border writing or a Ravi Shastri writing or XYZ, I'm sure they've done some research and they found out. I don't know what the logic is, but what I don't agree with, and I must share, is that on a given page, to have 5 guys writing on the same thing, saying pretty much the same thing, maybe by the same ghost, makes no sense at all. It does to the ghost. The ghost who got rich. Gentleman in the green.
A couple of things. You said journalism involves more investigation, but the kind of books Gideon writes, that also involves a lot of legwork. I believe that if you are honest to either journalism or writing, the investigation bit is mandatory if you have to rise above that quality. That is not the question. The question is, when we write biographies, mostly in India, why does it always have to be about the greater cricketers, when we know that the better books are invariably the biographies of the less famous cricketers. That has been a case throughout history. I mean, for example, the New Zealand cricketers have some of the most remarkable biographies. Martin Crowe, Ken Rutherford, John Wright, not Sharda's book, I mean, the older one. So, I mean, why don't we target the lesser books, lesser cricketers?
So, can I answer that? I think you made a point. One is that, especially the trend in India has been, and not just about cricketers, by and large, about film stars, X, Y, Z, we write hagiographies, you know, it's all fulsome praise and more praise and more praise and more praise. And the lesser known players may make for better stories, but they may find no takers. So that's the publishing logic. Because the richness, either in the publishing industry or amongst the readers for these kind of books was not there. That's my explanation. Unless you've got...
Yeah, I would agree with that. And as to why a lot of books aren't written is, as a career journalist, your vocation is you have to do your job and give my own interpretation of events. And you're paying your EMI, so you've got to give full faith to the job that you're doing. And when you retire, that's when you'll write the books that you wanted to write. The ghosting stuff is great, it pays well, and it's fine. But if anyone would want to read, say, Praveen Kumar's autobiography, I don't know. But I was able to write 2,000 or 3,500 words on it because my job said, fine, go ahead and do it.
No, I think what the point he's trying to make, and it's interesting, Sharda, so you might want to attempt the Praveen Kumar book, that he could be, he's a very interesting guy.
Now he's gone into politics.
He's gone into politics, you know. It could be a very unusual book in the Indian context now, but if the industry grows, if the publishing industry grows, if readership interests grow, then that kind of a work can be seminal.
And the publishing industry also has its sort of certain kind of limitations that, like the advertising industry was there, that they'll want to have, this is the particular kind of thing you have to give, you know, and if you want to do something, either you self-publish or you get paid pittance, you know, and like I'm saying, if you're in EMI and...
Well, we were listening to Vijay Lokapilli this morning say that he had 4 months to do that book on Kohli.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Only 4 months in court.
And of course, cricket contains a great deal more failure than success, except for extraordinary individuals of the Tendulkar and Bradman category. And the other point is that, I've forgotten who said it, it might have been Goethe or something like that, that genius is ever a mystery to itself. Genius, the outstanding players actually find it quite difficult to explain why they are as good as they are. It just comes naturally. It just seems to happen.
That's why so few of them were even half-decent captains. Because they couldn't tell the other guys what kind of mistakes they were making.
So, in the recent T20, I think one of the best pieces of articles I saw on Kohli's innings against Australia in the quarterfinal was by Gideon, when he said that as much as the marketers like to take cricket out of T20, Kohli keeps putting it back in. I just want to say that in this era of, you know, excess of cricket and a lot of T20 cricket and one-day cricket, there's sometimes imagery bias and a lot of hyperbole around, you know, fairly routine incidents. Do you think sometimes quality journalism gets lost and insightful journalism gets lost simply because of the quantity of cricket being played today?
Yeah, I think I made that point earlier, that it's very, very difficult. There is the quality there. It's just perhaps a little bit more difficult to find in the sort of the sheer voluminousness of the material available. But also, like I said before, the barriers to entry are lower. Certain writers have just sort of sprung up. Very good writers have sprung up almost like weeds out of the sidewalk. They haven't gone by the traditional routes. They haven't got cadetships in newspapers. They haven't written books, or they would like to write books, but they don't do those straight away. There are many more different ways to lead a cricket career these days, and a cricket journalism career.
Not just that, I think Facebook has made everybody a journalist. You can, you know, your blog, which would have been only for yourself and your few friends, is now out there in the world.
And from my point of view, I have not had a conventional sports writing career at all. To this day, I've still never worked in the sports department of a newspaper. I've always been either a business journalist, as I said before, or a feature writer, or I've been a contributor from outside the sports sections. I didn't have a traditional upbringing. I did everything in reverse. I wrote cricket books. You're meant to write cricket books at the end of a distinguished career. I started my career by writing cricket books.
Somebody? The lady there? I'll come to you once.
Hi, my name is Revati. Actually, I don't have this question specific to anyone, like anyone can answer. So basically, we see sports literature as such is a huge chunk of it is dominated by autobiographies. So we don't get to read a lot about the other aspects of the sport as such. So what about something like India winning the blind World Cup? Something like that is never written about as such. It's just biographies of either famous people, maybe upcomingly famous people, not so famous people. But what about the sport as such? Like,
You want to?
Just, you're saying why are there no books written about other subjects around sport rather than just a biography? Isn't that? I think the publishing industry is, in India particularly, you will find a lot of books about, say, women's football written from England. You'll find fascinating various subtopics around sport in American sports writing. The publishing industry around sport in India is just sort of a takeoff point where it will even look at these kind of topics that will seem interesting to them, that it will be even worth the while of the publisher to go through that material. And maybe this is an evolution, I don't know, maybe Ayaz will have a better idea, that you start with the autobiographies and the biographies and then you move on to other things. You do have a couple of books that are written largely around cricket, but what is written around everything else, you don't have that much. Is Shaji here? Shaji's written a book about grassroots football development, which is, it's just, I think all of us should read it to see how is it going to work. There is a whole subculture, not a subculture, it's actually a parallel culture in Indian sport that's working. That there may be a lot of books written in Bengali that we don't know about various other things. So,
yeah. I think, just to kind of give it a little more dimension, your question, I think people find stories about other people interesting. The reason why autobiographies or biographies are A, it's easier to sell to the publisher the idea. B, a lot more data is easily available or more easily available. You don't have to do much legwork or research. And C, I think generally the readers find things more interesting. But at its core, you must have a compelling story to say. Whether it's about development of football at the grassroots level or blind cricket or Sachin Tendulkar's life story. It must be a compelling story to say and told well.
At the same time, there are some books that I think are extremely obvious that haven't been done. There isn't a great T20 book. There isn't a great IPL book. Why hasn't it been done?
There's a complete dearth of books in sports books, certainly in India. That's one of the things that I mentioned at the start, that we don't seem to have enough.
The IPL, there are a couple of IPL books that are written from a sort of a business point of view that have actually talked about they do it.
There are 3 or 4.
Yeah, they are there.
But a player's perspective on the IPL, I'd love to read a player's diary of the IPL.
Ayaz, you had written a diary in '92 about the World Cup. Yeah. How did that do? And in '92, a diary coming about the World Cup, I don't know.
Thunder down under.
How did that do? What kind of where did that come from?
That was because I think the guy who was kicked about it was the owner, Tariq Ansari. Right. And he wanted to do not a book. He's saying, let's do a quick summation, like a diary of the World Cup, where India had not done well at all, but even so. I think this was the emergence of Tendulkar as a major player, so there was a lot of interest. Last couple of questions.
Good evening, all. I'm Parag.
I want the ad name.
We all know unfortunately, what happened with Mr. Harsha Bhogle. Now, a big superstar tweeted something. The captain of the Indian team retweeted it.
I don't know what happened. You mean commentary-wise?
Yeah.
No comment.
So
okay.
Unfortunately, he was he's out of the box now. He's out of the commentary box. Now, events like this, do they really bother you? My simple question is, do you really have to sometimes write which you are not convinced about, or you have to speak at such forums or write or something like that, which you think in today's digital world, when the word gets around in a split of second from one corner of the world to other?
No, are you saying Harsha wrote something and should he have written or not? Or
I think we all know what happened because...
No. So what is the question?
The question is, he said something which a superstar did not like.
So are you asking whether he should have written or not written, or
No, has it put any such events like this? Did it put any pressure on you? When
Does
you
it
are
put
speaking
any-
when you're speaking or you're
So,
writing?
I'm
for
not a
publications?
superstar like Harsha, so it puts no pressure on me at all. But I don't think it is fair that you should, if you've expressed an opinion, if that is the reason, then I don't think it is fair at all.
Okay.
Ayaz, I think what he's trying to ask is, do you guys as writers ever feel that pressure to write something you don't want to? I think that was his question.
That is what.
I mean, I can only speak for myself personally over here. In about 37, 38 years, there has not been a single instance where somebody has told me you must write this or not write that.
Okay.
From the administration or from the players. Players will come and offer you, or even administrators. It's up to you to accept or reject what you think is, worthwhile. But not, I must confess here that not once has there been any administrator who's come and said, write something favorable or don't write about that.
What you will get is someone will call you after something written and say you should not have written this and this is not fair. And then you ask them, are the facts wrong in it? And if the facts are not wrong, they can't give you an answer for that. So they will complain about it.
Post
They will fight
facto,
about
people
it.
might question why did you write this? How much did you know? What? And you're convinced, or you are thorough about your details. You don't have to bother.
And they won't talk to you for some time. Or whatever.
That's okay.
So nice to know that. Thank you.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah, I have a non-journalistic question, but a cricketing question, and it's for Mr. Haigh. I'd like to know what you think the scoreline will be for the upcoming Test series between India and Australia. It's nice to get a Australian perspective to it.
I might quote Paul Gascoigne here: "I never make predictions, and I never will."
Okay. I think. Oh, there's one more.
Sorry, this last one. So all three of you obviously are very sort of accomplished writers in cricket. And my question is, do you ever think about writing about someone outside of cricket? And is there like a secret project that you think, like, I really want to write about this person or about this thing?
Well, I've written a lot outside cricket.
But
yeah.
But is there still a project or something that you really want to do at this point in time? And it's for you that question.
Gideon's written a book about the Australian car industry. Car industry?
I've written about car industry.
Many non-cricketing sort of topics. So he's not qualified to answer this question.
Yeah. I've always thought
I'm asking about this at this point of time.
At this point in time, I was asked recently whether there was a book that if I had unlimited time and unlimited resources, that I would like to write, a sort of an idea for a book. And I thought, I would quite like to write a cricket history of Australia. Not a history of Australian cricket, but a history of the way in which Australia has been shaped by cricket. Sort of doing it from the opposite point of view. And not just simply international cricket, but the way in which the creation of a cricket system, the creation of cricket at club level, the creation of cricket in regions shaped the kind of the social structures and civilizing patterns in the Australian continent. It's such an esoteric idea, I find it difficult to sell to a publisher, but it's something I think actually needs to be done. It goes back to a remark I once read of C.L.R. James, where he said the person who writes about Donald Bradman must be able to write about Australia. I think if we're going to do anything original in the writing about cricket, it's going to be placing it within the larger context of historical and social and economic forces.
I agree. So, what I would like to write at this point in time, my passion outside of cricket, of course, is more history, and one of the best projects I did was India 50, Making of a Nation, a book I co-authored. Anyway, I would like to do a book on Ranjit Singh ji and Gandhi. Born 9 miles apart, not even 9 years apart. And when Gandhi went to England first to study law, he carried a letter to Ranjit Singh ji as a letter of introduction. And my surmise is, it's not documented, I asked Ram Guha once, but he didn't seem to know, that they had a tiff, like two Gujarati
You
Baniyas.
could write a novel.
Yeah, so, and that's where Gandhi's aversion with cricket began. Because the kind of hedonistic lifestyle which he saw of Ranjit Singh ji, Gandhiji was most anti the first test match played in India in 1932-33 against Jardin's team. And it was Ambedkar who convinced him that you must let this match go through. Otherwise he wanted, boycott in Mumbai or Bombay.
Outside of cricket, I would like to write about, I would like to do a travel book. I would like to travel. And there are many other topics for which I'm...
Which part of the world?
No, in India, the two coasts where the fish book has been written, sort of similar. I don't know if that's... Or maybe the northeast of the country.
After the EMIs are done with.
The EMIs are very important. Next year, end of next year, I'll be done.
There is actually a substantial tradition of fine cricket literature from people who don't write predominantly about the game. The best of the cricket is by the most distinguished Indian historian, Chandra Guha. N.S. Ramaswamy and Sujit Mukherjee were both kind of excelled in other literary fields and brought those sensibilities to their cricket writing.
Two of the most entertaining books were by Francis Edmonds, which was really enjoyable to read.
There's I don't know if anyone has read a novel called Centurion. Has anyone read Centurion? It's written by I think he's an English professor who teaches at Shivnagar University just outside Noida. And it's the most zany cricket novel you will ever read. And it's published by Penguin. Definitely buy it. I find it as fascinating as Spider-Man. Must be read.
All right. Thank you so much. There was a marathon here.